Good morning, afternoon, evening. We do record these, so I guess we're time bending here. We could be any of the above. Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. It's Friday as we record these. We do CDO Matters live on Fridays, which means I'm always in a good mood because it's Friday. I am joined by my partner in crime, Mr. Ben Bourgeois. Hello, Ben. Happy Friday.
Hey, Malcolm. Happy Friday. Good Friday morning for you.
Indeed. Indeed. Looking forward to discussing a bunch of fun things today. Thanks everybody who's joining online on LinkedIn or through our recording platform, this thing called Goldcast, or if you're watching, later on YouTube or anywhere else. Really appreciate the support. Really appreciate you supporting our channel, our message, trying to get the good word out about data management, master data management, data strategy, data governance. It's no secret that I'm a former Gartner analyst. I used to do these things every day with CDOs and CIOs. I would have these things called inquiries or inquiries, one of the two, depending, I guess. Maybe I've got some residual British accent flowing over. We can talk about that. But I used to have the conversations every day with data leaders, talking about what works and what doesn't work. And now I'm bringing that to everybody through LinkedIn and through every other channel that we can, because my mission is to increase the tenure of chief data officers and raise the bar when it comes to knowledge about things about data governance and data strategy and MDM. So that's me. That's why we're here. What's going on with you, Ben?
Not much. I mean, it's good to see you stateside. I mean, you've had a busy summer so far. You just got back last week from the Gartner Data Analytics Summit in London, right?
Yeah, it was great. We were there a full week, Saturday to a Saturday. The conference was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but we folded in a couple of meetings with clients over in London, which was fantastic. So it was a busy week. It was a great week. It's an invigorating week. I mean, there's nothing better for people who do what I do, right? Yes, I work at a software company, but my primary function here is as a thought leader, sharing what I know. And for people who do what I do, meaning speaking at events and interfacing and networking, it's kind of like the Super Bowl. Although I guess in the case of London, it wouldn't be the Super Bowl. It would be more like the World Cup.
Yeah.
So from that regard, I mean, there's few things that are better to go in and spend a week with peers and with clients and with prospects and with my fellow analysts. I mean, I worked at Gartner for 3 years, so I know all those folks. They're fantastic. They're some of the smartest people I've ever met. So it's for me to go to Gartner events. It's even more special than it would otherwise be because I get to see people that I used to work with. We were at Gartner. We were fully remote, which means I could work here from my little cave in Florida, and I would be working with others who were anywhere on the planet. And you never get to see those people. You only see them at these events. So, I got to see people that I'd worked with for 3 years and that I hadn't met until last week, which is kind of crazy. But it's like, oh, okay, well, you're a little taller than I thought, or it's just fun stuff. So Gartner London was great. There were 4,400 people at the Gartner event in Orlando about a month ago, and there were 3,700 in Orlando, which is or in London. Sorry, which is fantastic. Like way more people coming to London than I ever thought. So it was a great week.
Yeah, and it's been like you mentioned Orlando. That was just in late March. I mean, kind of a double whammy for you, right? You have the two huge summits, that close to each other. I imagine content of these things can be a little similar, right? They're not going to make these tectonic shifts in their analysis of the market and what they're presenting on, but something that has changed just a ton in the past 3 months, I'm sure, is just AI, right? That's just something that's just pervasive. It's getting in every industry, every product. It's starting to affect every role. Your role, my role. Was that reflected at Gartner London? Was there tons of talk of AI?
Yeah, I mean, so Gartner is incredibly well polished, right? Their conferences are these well-oiled machines that have well-defined agendas months in advance. As a matter of fact, when I worked at Gartner, I would be working on presentations in September, October, November of the previous year for them to be presented at conferences in the following summer. Mm-hmm. So this kind of gives you an idea of how much prep goes into creating content for these Gartner events. That's not a bad thing, unless, of course, the entire world turns upside down literally in 3 months with the launch of GPT and Bard and Bing and everything else.
Right.
So this is a long-winded way of me saying the content really didn't change at all between Orlando in March and now at all, because it's, you know, once Gartner gets locked and loaded, for a conference season, and a conference season will go from the spring all the way to the fall. They'll start in Orlando, they'll go to London, and then they'll go to Mumbai, and then they'll go to Sydney, and then they'll go to Tokyo, and the content of those things really doesn't change. So I did a big summary coming out of Orlando, kind of my key takeaways. Published a blog about that on the resources section of prophecy.com. So it's still valid, because in terms of like key takeaways from a content perspective, that blogger wrote in actually early April. Still a great resource, still there. So if you're interested in like, you know, what some of the key takeaways from a content perspective were, I would invite you to go check out that blog at prophecy.com. And probably more than you ever cared to know about the editorial process at Gartner when it comes to these conferences. But content was largely the same, but your point is taken. AI. Right, like it's the belle of the ball. So while Gartner may not be talking much about it per se, the vendors certainly are. Like I noticed just in the span of 3 months, the vendors have pivoted from, you know, AI is, you know, kind of you know, we're keeping an eye on it and we're looking at it and it's our roadmap too. It's like now it's the thing, right? Like it's the thing. And rightfully so. I mean, it is transformational, and I'm watching it unfold right before our very eyes. There are areas in the Gartner narrative that I think that are a natural fit that we can talk a little bit more about, particularly the data fabric, where, you know, Gartner's been talking about the data fabric for the better part of almost 3 years now. I was involved in early discussions around kind of crafting that narrative, and I did a number of peer reviews on research that my coworkers were doing on the data fabric, and it's always been a story about the data fabric. That is, by the way, has always been a story about augmentation, which is Gartner's kind of fancy way of saying the use of AI, graph, other shiny new advanced technologies to increase levels of automation in data management. So the data fabric is
what you're doing, not totally replace.
Yeah. Augmenting, right? And so, and what that really means is that, you know, on a spectrum, there's one end of the spectrum is humans do it all. Other end of the spectrum is machines do it all. Augmentation is a place, maybe if 0 is humans do it all and 10 is machines do it all, augmentation is maybe a 3 or 4 or 5, right? Where machines are starting to help and augment human-based processes. So data fabric always had an augmentation slant to it, as it were. It was always one of the kind of the key things of the fabric, but it was never the kind of the forefront. It was just kind of baked in to the fabric pie, as it were. And now I think Gartner rightfully, as am I, by the way, and I'm really saying, hey, you know, the data fabric will be how in many ways how AI is operationalized at scale for a lot of large companies. Right. So AI was certainly the buzz. Gartner has kind of found a way to weave some of that into the content for these presentations, which are now several months old. But yeah, just a lot of buzz at the conference as a whole because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did it get any specific into OpenAI or any of the specific tools, or because I mean, you just see so many vendors, so many, you know, even B2B traditional vendors, and even like Prophecy, right, incorporating a lot of OpenAI into the product.
Absolutely, yeah, without it,
you know, fast.
Without a doubt. Just want to say hi to a few folks. I see people from Rotterdam, Amsterdam. Happy Friday afternoon. Wow, Paul, thanks, and Michael, thank you for joining all the way from the Netherlands. One of my favorite places on the planet for sure. One of the nicest people, smartest people too. It's like they all speak like 4 languages. It's fantastic. But yeah, hi, Ron. Awesome stuff. Anyway, vendors, and our vendors kind of, you know, integrating AI. Yeah, of course they are. I think some of the vendors that are talking about it the most are catalog centric vendors, and data management vendors writ large are certainly talking about AI, but I think the catalog space is just really crowded right now. Not largely, but partially as a response to the growth of the data fabric, and I would argue as well the growth of the data mesh. These are two separate things here, folks. Look to some of my previous LinkedIn posts around mesh versus fabric. These are very different things. But thanks in part, I think, to the growth of both of those phenomena, you've seen a real growth over the last year of companies building data catalogs. It's like every time I go to these events, it's like more and more and more vendors in the data catalog space that I've just like never heard of before. You walk up to the booth and you're like, okay, well, what's this company? Never heard of them before. Of course, data catalog. Then you walk down a little bit more and it's like, oh yeah, okay, another data catalog. Oh, there's another one. They're not saying data catalog, but they're a governance platform. Okay, data catalog.
So imagine that's such a great use case for OpenAI or other AI applications, feeding it so much metadata about everything, lineage, all this other information. It's just kind of ripe for a machine learning application, right?
Completely. Profiling and discovery are just data profiling, data discovery, just a natural fit, right?
Sure.
So a lot of those folks are kind of waving an AI flag, and rightfully so. I mean, those processes, especially when you're talking about discovery of data that can be all over the place, there's certainly a perfect fit there. Interestingly, it's so strange to me, but by comparison to like 10 years ago at these events, and I've been going to them a long time, now it's the data catalog, but 10 years ago it was data quality. But now you can walk the halls of these events and nobody's talking about data quality. Like, it's just, there are data quality vendors, some of them, but it's like, you just don't see it. Like, you don't see the banner over top of the vendor name being data quality like you used to, like 10 years ago. You're just not seeing it now, which I find really curious, because that's another one from an AI perspective, to me, is, using a basketball term, is a complete layup. I fully expect that vendors like Prophecy will be integrating AI in support of data quality use cases, particularly kind of data verification, data validation, data enrichment is another one, right? Where the perfect fit here, particularly when you are kind of using it to develop more stories or narratives around data. And I think that's kind of some interesting stories there, but I didn't see it from a data quality perspective because there's just not a lot of vendors out there that are saying they just do data quality. Maybe it's unsexy, or maybe it's fallen out of favor. I don't know. I mean, data quality is as important as it's ever been.
Yeah.
I made an interesting post this week on LinkedIn, like thinking out loud, which is what I do often, guys. Like I'm throwing stuff out on LinkedIn all the time. I'm seeing if it's the metaphoric spaghetti on the fridge. Does it stick or does it not stick? I'll have these, like, what our coworker Haley Ben would call fever dreams. I'll have these fever dreams where these ideas will pop into my head. It's like, okay, hey, wait a minute. It's like, wow, these large language models seem to have figured out English better than we have, right? Like, wow, this is phenomenal. How did they do that? Oh, well, they were trained off the internet.
Right, like, okay, pre-2021.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, wait a minute. It's not like the internet is like known for good writing. It's not no, nobody would say, oh, well, the internet, Charles Dickens, all the greatest. Yeah, exactly. Ernest Hemingway, Charles Dickens, the internet. Yeah, I mean, it's the internet is a wasteland of poor grammar and poor diction and poor spelling and just like poor everything when it comes to our language. The internet is mangling our language as we speak. Yet somehow these things are like taking that and then writing really well and creatively. And yes, I understand the hallucination thing. I get all of that. But the model was built for kind of a creative endeavor. So it's because language is inherently a creative endeavor. You're creating as you go. So it's no surprise to me that there are some of these hallucinations. But I was thinking, my fever dream was like, well, if they figured out how to work around all of the bad inputs, the garbage that is poorly written and poorly spoken English, well, then maybe they figured out a way around garbage from more kind of mundane data management use cases.
Yeah.
Right. Like we fat finger stuff all the time when we're typing things in. We'll transpose letters when we're typing a customer name or a supplier name. We're doing all these other things that are creating data quality problems. And well, that sounds like a perfect fit for AI. Maybe they can help fix some of that stuff. So that's kind of what I was kind of threw this out on LinkedIn, and the honestly the reaction to that has been kind of a bit lukewarm, because I think like the garbage in, garbage out paradigm is like it's like a worldview. It's like, what do you mean? You know, that may not necessarily always be true anymore. It's always been true. It's the house it's the foundation we built the data quality house on.
Right. I mean, it goes back to augmentation, right? I mean, it's not something you'll ever be able to truly leave to an open AI or a machine learning process, because, you see these headlines all the time about, Google goes on stage and, introduces Bard, and they ask, who the CEO of Amazon is or whatever. And it still says Jeff Bezos, because from the training set, he is listed in probably 50 times more sources as the CEO as Andy Jassy is now, who's only been at the helm for, a few years. So it's like it's almost pulling the most commonly attributable thing, not necessarily the correct thing. So definitely need to review anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's from a kind of a data management perspective. I think right now, with the state of the models as they exist today, at least these large commercial models, Bing, Bard, Chat, others. Mm-hmm. I think it's correct to assume that the answers you're going to get back are wrong, right? I mean, I think you would kind of almost have to. And if yes, then are we doing more harm than good? I mean, it kind of comes back to, well, it's all about the prompt and kind of correctly engineering the prompt. Like, okay, so that means you're asking data stewards
your resume, yeah,
exactly. Like, but I don't know, man. It's like I think about this prompt stuff, and I'm pretty old. Like, this is real gray hair. This is not a highlight. I painted it on. I'm pretty old, and I remember a time when the internet was just blowing up, when you actually had to hand write in IP addresses into the menu bars, like of browsers, right? Where there was no such thing as like tiny URLs, right? Where early days of the internet, a lot of the kind of the basic problems were kind of ultimately figured out, and I kind of view the prompt thing as something that will be figured out, because like as they stand, these models were built with zero context. The only context they have is this is a language,
right?
like literally that's it, right? This is a language, and figure out the pattern of the language. That's the only context they have. And then the prompt is about context, right? It's about providing context. It's about aiming the LLM cannon, as it were.
Right.
And then the more specific you make the prompt, the more context you give it, and the more specific, the more likely you are to get an accurate answer, because the model was built on this thing that has no context. It's just like all data, right? I see a world where these models could be adapted for specific workflows. Take, for example, quote to cash, right? Or supplier onboarding, or procure to pay, right? Or even smaller workflows where what the outcome should be, right? You know what the outcome should be of a quote to cash, right? It's like the contract is fulfilled, and goods are delivered and revenue is recognized, right? Like you can map out that process and know pretty well what's supposed to happen at each step of the way. And when you give that context to generative AI, I have to think that it could figure out how to deal with a lot of data quality issues, because the context is known, right? The end game is known. And when I think about it in more detail, like a data steward today, Like just put yourself in the shoes of a data steward, and you're maybe in an MDM UI, maybe you're in a data quality UI, maybe you're in an Excel spreadsheet, doesn't matter. And you see Acme and Acme Inc. Right? And that's largely all you're seeing. You don't see the context of where this was created. Maybe you could drill into it a little bit, but you don't understand what workflow this came from. You don't understand the broader context. You most certainly don't understand that this very record had successful transactions against it in the past, or that record had failed transactions against it in the past. You don't see all of the deep metadata that would be associated to Acme Incorporated, or any of the relationships that Acme may have across your kind of a data estate. So data stewards are completely operating in a vacuum.
Yes.
Right. Where it is this one snapshot in time where you have to figure out, is Acme Inc. the same as Acme LLC? And that's pretty much all you got. And you have to look at it on the surface and say, well, they may be the same, they may not be the same. Well, let me go pull the address, or let me go do some Google searching and other things. But it's like, in the future, and this is largely, folks, the data fabric, what I'm talking about here, all of that context, all of the other context, what the date was created, the user it was created by, right? The context in which it was created, the time of day that it was created by, does it have its successful transactions, or has it ever had successful transactions in the past? On and on and on. All of that will go into a pot, and AI will be able to look at it and say, yeah, it's Acme LLC and Acme Inc. are the exact same thing. And even though they're spelled differently, or maybe even they have a completely different address, given that everything that I know, given all of that metadata, right? I'm 100% sure these are the same things. And by the way, data steward, don't even bother, because I will automatically update these within the source systems.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't even get to a data steward's desk, because AI would look at it and say, well, these are the exact same thing. 2 or 3 letters were transcribed. I know pretty much, based on all that other metadata that I'm looking at, I know that these things are the same thing, and I'll just go ahead and fix it straight in the source system. No human intervention required.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the importance of having that context there, right? We were talking about an example yesterday about, you're matching Ben Bourgeois and Benjamin Bourgeois in 2 different systems, and this one, it says his address is in Georgia, and this one, it says it's in Louisiana, and you have however many instances or whatever you're matching on, you say, okay, it's the same person, we'll fix the incorrect address. But I happen to actually move. And when I made a purchase in Georgia, I should probably, be taxed based on that. So it is just so much context of, oh, don't go back and just change that in your ERP and send out his, his W-2 to the wrong address or something, or tax him based on the wrong state. So it's just all that context you just wouldn't get from seeing Ben and Benjamin just side by side, right?
Exactly. That everything we just described is the vision of the data fabric, which I'm a complete and total believer, by the way. Now, we got a couple of questions. So I'd love to get to the questions. I don't want to leave folks behind. But if we loop back to the data fabric conversation, we can certainly talk about Microsoft and their big announcement this week around the data fabric, because I think there's things there to discuss. But Natalie, hello from TO, the Big Smoke. I'll be up in Toronto later this fall, I hope. Oh, Ron, thanks. My Amazon box. That's our high budget enterprise that we've got going on here for props. Write on boxes and hold them up and hug them. Paul asks.
One or two, I'm not sure. Saw about that one.
Paul asks, as data leaders, what can we do today to prepare for implementing AI in our processes? What a wonderful question. I think a natural reaction would be for data leaders to say, let's go hire some data scientists, right? And I think that's an overreaction. If you don't have them today, if you don't already have data scientists, I wouldn't run out necessarily and go buy one. I think increasingly a lot of these models will be heavily commoditized. And I think the extremely large vendors in the data management space will be investing in a lot of solutions that will negate your need to build customized models or for a lot of this stuff. That said, a part of this, most certainly, if you are a data and analytics leader of a $500 million company, $1 billion company, $2 billion company, most certainly you need to be focused on building out some sort of data science competencies within your organization. That goes without saying. Now, again, that doesn't mean you need to go and run out and hire data scientists, because that's a huge investment. And if you're not ready, that person's going to be sitting on his or her hands, and it's going to be costing you a lot of money. So, I think the right answer here, is to focus on strategy, right? I would be derelict if I didn't say that you need to have some sort of broader strategy here. This is about business outcomes. This is about business results. So first and foremost, focus on a strategy and figure out where AI would fit into your business strategy. Not necessarily just kind of your automating data stuff, the things that we were talking about at data quality and MDM and maybe even data modeling, but figure out where AI would benefit your business. So work backwards from an overall business strategy, focus on a data strategy, start figuring out where AI fits into your overall business strategy and how added automation in core business processes will lead and support that overall business strategy. So we need to be taking a strategic view here. We can't just be simply reacting and just going and hiring people and building out organizations. This needs to be driven by data, by some sort of business strategy. At more of a tactical level, there is a role. So that's kind of the top down, and that's the place to start. Start from the top, start from your strategy. If you don't have a data strategy, you need to absolutely be focused on one. If you don't have some sort of overall operating model for your data and analytics organization, you absolutely positively need to have one. That's the top down. The bottom up, I do think that there is a role here for building out and focusing in the short term on kind of basic data management, blocking and tackling. Yes, a data catalog will play a role here. Yes, MDM and data quality solutions will continue to play a role here. This is the technology answer to the strategy, right? So you've got to have the strategy. The technology will support the strategy. So start kind of, if you don't already have some of these basic building blocks, you need to have them. One of the most important building blocks of all is data governance, right? Everything we talk about when it comes to AI will loop right back to data governance. Whether you're talking about bias, whether you're talking about ethics, whether you were talking about visibility and transparency of AI, it all comes back to governance. Companies that end up getting stung by AI or having ended up in the news with these horror stories of how AI was poorly applied or how AI made dumb decisions that were biased and that ended up negatively impacting organizations will be companies that have not figured out how to integrate AI into an overall data governance framework. So it's all of those things. It's strategy, it's systems implementation, it's foundation of data management as a discipline and a technology. But first and foremost, I'd be focused on governance. And if you don't have a governance organization built out, which most companies don't, sadly, I would really be doubling down there. And because, just charging towards AI without having any understanding of how it kind of plugs into overall data governance framework would be a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's really high level, I understand, but happy to go offline to dive into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Question from Ron. Oh, go ahead, Ben. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I was just saying, no, I think, you said the first one is the top down, the high level, that's the right answer, right?
Yeah.
I think even at a tactical level, it's just getting some experience with it. I saw a post on LinkedIn recently about, it was a comic strip, it was a cartoon kind of satirical thing, but it was, hey, we're not going to hire a copywriter or a marketer or a coder. We're just going to hire a prompt engineer and just have ChatGPT do everything. And it was just kind of showing, yes, prompt engineering is critically important. Malcolm, you talked about there's no context. You have to understand the way to prompt the system to get what you want. But I think a quick way to just incorporate that is just use it. I mean, I use it all the time to summarize extremely long documents in super quick response. I use it just for ideas for, hey, give me headers for, I'm writing a blog on this. Give me ad headlines or ideas for this. It's kind of incorporating it into just day to day, really, and not looking at it as I'm going to hire a prompt engineer to do all things OpenAI for my team, my company, whatever. It's just getting people thinking of how can we augment what we're doing just to, make some things a little easier, kind of automate some of that mundane stuff.
Absolutely.
Now that's the absolute, I think, individual tactical level of it, but that's helpful.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, these can be great productivity enhancers. Now, again, if you are a data steward, or if you are, a governance committee chair, or if you are doing, any of the other things that need oversight and diligence, I wouldn't necessarily just start rushing blindly towards implementation of these processes, because,
plug your into it, run with it.
Yeah, because the first thing senior management is going to ask is, okay, well, how did this happen, or how did we get here, right? And if the answer is, well, I used, Chat GPT in order to define a governance policy.
Is that going to fly with your CFO or your
exactly
people in charge of risk management?
Yeah, we were already seeing backlashes to this, right? Where it's like, I just saw this case about some judge in Texas here in the U.S. who was like making, issued some sort of writ or something within his courtroom that any lawyer that submits any sort of case material has to prove that it wasn't done using ChatGPT, right?
Right.
And on and on. So yeah, I think playing with it absolutely is a great start, but just realize that all that glitters is not gold, and also certainly realize here, folks, that whatever you ask that thing and whatever you feed it is now in the public domain, right? What it's public. So it's whatever you give ChatGPT, right? If you copy and paste, if you are copying and pasting any internal information that you think would otherwise be sensitive or is per your governance policies, well, then you just violated your governance policies, because that data is now in the public domain. So anything you give this it's basically like sending an email off into the ether and you're not entirely sure who gets it. So be very, very, very careful with that. Ron's got a question. I think it's not just corporate resources, but oh, wait a minute, hold on. He had another one. I'm getting ahead of myself. Do you think that's still hard to convince the higher management to invest in data governance and MDM? IT knows the value, but I still think the business. Oh, thanks. My eyes. Yes, it's still hard to convince upper management to invest in data governance and MDM. I don't know, Ron. I'm not entirely sure that IT knows the business value. They know the data management value, right? IT folks know that MDM and data governance and data quality tools can help reduce duplicate data, can reduce data errors, can help ensure more efficient business processes and increase the accuracy of decision making. It knows that stuff. IT knows that stuff. We know it. Right? We believe it. It's in every fiber of our being, because we manage data for a living. And if we make the data better, then we've done our jobs. But I'm not so sure that IT people actually know the business value of the data. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. It's still really hard for most IT people to convince upper management of the business benefit of better data. So there's a difference here. When I was a Gartner analyst, I would ask all the time. I get on the phone with CDOs and CIOs and VPs of data and analytics, and they would say, I'm embarking on this huge thing. I'm doing this. I'm investing in this software, that software. And I would say, fantastic. How will you know you've succeeded? And the answer almost always was, well, the data will be better. That's not the right answer, because nobody cares about that. Because if people had cared about that, if people cared about bad data, it wouldn't exist.
Right.
Right? But it does, right? Because what they care about is making more money, selling more stuff, right?
Yes.
They care about the processes that they're managing day in and day out. They don't really necessarily care about the data. And that's a hard truth to come to terms with as a data person. Like, what do you mean you don't care about the data? It's how do you not, right? It's literally the gasoline of our business engine. But to get business people to care about this stuff, you need to find a way to quantify the business benefits of investments in data. And
we're going to onboard a new healthcare provider in 2 weeks versus 6 months, and they're going to get billing, and you're going to make X.
Good example.
Or bad debt or whatever.
Good example. The list of potential KPIs to focus on here is practically endless, right? There are. People would ask me all the time at Gartner, like, oh, well, do you have some sample KPIs that I could use? And the answer is yes, I have thousands. And we'd actually mapped out all the potential KPIs that were on this gigantic spreadsheet. so there's certainly no shortage of areas that you could be focused on. But you need to figure out, okay, if I improve this data, if I reduce this duplicate rate, right, or if I increase the accuracy of my data, what will that mean to downstream business processes in real terms, meaning dollars or euros or krona or whatever, it doesn't matter, and quantify that. And I would hear all the time from data leaders like, oh, Malcolm, that sounds great. In theory, that sounds great, but the impacts here are indirect. You can't make a direct connection between better data and business performance. Untrue. We live in a world of modeling. Our organizations model data for a living. Most everybody out there, if you're selling stuff, you're probably doing some sort of sales forecast right now.
Yes.
That's a model. Right? We model data for a living. We know how to do this. We're data and analytics people. So the idea that we could model a sales forecast, or that we could model potential future demand of our goods, or that we could model how long it takes for our materials to arrive on a boat from overseas, if we could do that modeling, we can most certainly be doing the modeling that says, if I reduce my duplicate rate or increase the consistency of my data, or whatever the data management metric is, there's lots of them, we can certainly model how doing that will drive business benefits. So, this is something I heard all the time, and I would challenge my clients when I was a Gartner analyst. It's absolutely possible. It's hard, but it's not impossible. Look at more questions.
Question on the list of KPIs.
All right, hold on. Maybe I got to put on my glasses. Man, I'm getting old. Eyesight going. Oh, there we go. Wait a minute. It's just I think anyone who device that connects to the internet could help it work. Yeah, totally agree with you, Ron. Okay, Paul. Who says Dutch people aren't funny? Okay. I think you're kidding. Where can you find that map of KPIs? I don't know. Maybe you are. Maybe you aren't. The map of KPIs is in your business. It's there, right? Sit down with your business stakeholders and ask them, what are your KPIs, right? So whether you're being tongue in cheek or not, I think there's a valid answer here, which is, if you don't know what your business success metrics are, if you're a data leader and you don't know how your chief revenue officer, or your chief procurement officer, or even your chief executive officer, if you don't know what their metrics are, you need to start asking, right? And it's those metrics that you need to be focused on. And chances are pretty good if you find the right people within these organizations. And I would say, based on my experience, having done this, that the people here who manage these metrics are relatively easy to find. They're typically in what I call FP&A, financial planning and analysis roles. They're typically the people who are working on budgets. They're typically the people who are working on getting budget approval, or mapping out sales forecasts, or mapping out inventory costs. But they're the ones that are that are developing the models that go to finance for any of the long range financial planning within the organization. Those are the folks that know the KPIs. They're there. And typically, for me, in my experience, they're relatively easy to find. So if you don't know where they are, and you don't know what the lists are, it doesn't matter that Gartner's got a list of 1,000, or I could come up with a list of 1,000. What's relevant are the relevant KPIs for your business. Don't invent new KPIs, right? As data people, don't invent some new business KPI that you think might be relevant, because chances are it may not be. And if it's not relevant, if your business executives are not being measured on that KPI, then if you create a new one, it's irrelevant. It's kind of like building your own speedometer, right? Nobody's using that speedometer. You need to find the speedometer that everybody is using and is relevant to the business leaders. Oh, you were just kidding. Good. Thanks. I thought you were. It's so hard to infer context or meaning in text. I thought you were kidding. So Microsoft Fabric. Getting back to our one of our topics here, the Fabric.
Yeah, some big news while you were in Gartner London, right? That was a jam-packed week.
Yeah, so Microsoft did their annual build. It's their developer conference. I've never actually been to their developer conference, but it looked like a pretty well attended event. Certainly looked like a big event. Microsoft, wow. Like, in the space of 5 years, Azure has gone from like not even on the map at all,
right,
to like when I was at Gartner, it was we're deploying in Azure, we're deploying in Azure, we're deploying in Azure. like over and over and over and over again. We at the booth writ large, so Prophecy had a booth. We talked to over 600 people, which is just crazy if you think about it. Yeah. But I could count on one hand the number of people who said we're deploying in AWS. So like that was like, holy cow, wow, what a shift in 5 years. Yeah. Towards Microsoft, and I think that's kind of a testament to the stuff that they're working on and some of their market focus. I mean, they came out publicly and said we are coming after Amazon in the cloud space, in the infrastructure space, and they are doing it. That's why we're talking about Microsoft today, because so many of the people that I was talking to, both in Orlando and in London, it was Microsoft, Microsoft, Microsoft. So kudos to Microsoft for that. And then last week, they come out with this announcement called a Fabric. Now, if you've been following me for any length of time, you'll know that I am both a skeptic and a believer. meaning it's complicated. I'm a believer. The data fabric will be how AI is operationalized at scale for most large organizations. The data fabric is very, very real, and it will absolutely positively have transformational impacts on how we manage data, without a doubt. It will drastically accelerate the movement along that spectrum I was talking about, from completely human-driven to completely automated, right? And that's really what the fabric is about. The data fabric, if you ask me, the data fabric is an architectural construct in which data informs its classification and use, where data itself informs its classification and use. Meaning you are using AI, you're using graph, you're using other advanced technologies to allow data to start to understand the best way to use it, the best way to classify it, the best way to govern it, the best way to ensure its own quality. We just talked about that for 15 minutes. So this is the data fabric. All in, I'm a huge believer. 6 months ago, I was saying, oh man, we got a long way to go. We got a long way to go here. Don't put the cart before the horse. Pick your metaphor, doesn't matter. But we got a long way to go. And now, like in the span of 3 months, is like, ooh, everything's changed. Because now we can actually see a world where these generative AI models, and not just generative AI, which is a subset of kind of deep learning, I think it's probably more appropriate, where we leverage deep learning to figure out the best way to use data, the best way to govern data, the best way to classify data. Because we can see it now. I don't think we could see it a year ago, but all this buzz with ChatGPT, we can see it. Now, the skeptic in me is really kind of related to vendor positioning, because the Gartner blood still kind of really flows through me. And what Gartner would say, and what I would say, which is my opinion, is right now you cannot buy a data fabric. You can't go and buy one. Although, as of last Wednesday, Microsoft will happily sell you one. What they're selling, I believe, based on the press release that I saw, is the starting point. Right, is a starting point, is an overall foundation that would include cloud infrastructure, that could potentially even include some of the data catalog functionality that we're talking about, could even include some data integration functionality that we're talking about. Right. It's a building block. It's like the first floor of a 10-story building, right? What it appears to me, what Microsoft has done is said, okay, this is our fabric, and it's really enabling infrastructure. Yes. But the differentiating thing of a data fabric is not necessarily infrastructure, which is important. You've got to have it. But the thing that is going to differentiate it is what Gartner calls active metadata, or what I've been calling in this conversation, the use of data to inform its own classification, or data to inform its own classification and use. Right. To get there, Gartner would say you have to activate metadata, which means you go from this kind of passive metadata that is a snapshot in time that describes things in a very static way, to where more metadata can now be something that is kind of scanned and analyzed constantly to understand, how do we define data? How do we model data? How do we structure data? How do we govern it? Who can have access? Who shouldn't have access? On and on and on. Where constantly AI is figuring these things out in real time. Now that, as I know it, doesn't necessarily yet exist in Microsoft, but I'll tell you what, given their investments in OpenAI, given their investments in the infrastructure, from everything that I've seen over the last 6 months, they seem uniquely positioned to get to the finish line first.
Yeah.
At least insofar as being able to sell you something that looks an awful lot like a fully formed data fabric. I don't see it today. What I see is core enabling, waving hands, core enabling infrastructure, which is important. But once they start to figure out how to deeply integrate OpenAI into all of those pieces, Synapse for BI, Azure Data Factory, Purview for the data catalog, any other partner provided solutions for any other data management capabilities like MDM, you start to get a lot closer, I think, to the vision of what a data fabric could truly be.
Right. Yeah. It seems like at launch, at least, it's the fabric one lake, right? It's just have the data all dumped in one place and just have it persisted once. And whether you're running it in Power BI or you're bringing it in with Azure Data Factory, it's just you're saving on compute and storage, right? That's kind of the first thing is let's not duplicate and persist this thing everywhere. But yeah, to your point, over time, you're going to see these Purview and other integrations where it can scan this metadata and know, okay, this originated in Workday, it has an SSN, it's probably classified as XYZ. And it's kind of looking at that over time, getting smarter training model.
Yep. Michael asked a really good question. Is like, if we will we soon reach a data singularity where we can no longer predict which new product services will appear in a year or two? It certainly appears that way. I don't know. Or maybe just to people who were on the outside, right? If you would have asked anybody who was working for OpenAI 3 years ago, they would have known that it was coming. So I think that they did a really good job there of keeping their, metaphorically, their cards close to their chest and not talking about this. There's been many that have been talking about AI for a long, long time. Right. I think what's partially interesting now is that I think some of these revelations are, well, first of all, things are accelerating. There's no doubt about that, right? Like talk to any software engineer. Well, not any, most, and they'll all mostly tell you that they're now using some sort of copilot, right, to help automate some of the more kind of rote processes in the world of like developing code. So you're seeing productivity gains 30-40% in the software engineering space, and things are starting to kind of like inflect up, right, in terms of the pace of innovation. So how will we predict where we're going? I don't know, because I think increasingly in another year or so, it's going to be the machines kind of defining where we're going and not necessarily potentially just purely market need, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I don't know. I need to think some more about that. I need to think some more about that because what I see unfolding is like a lot of previous assumptions about kind of the nature of at least our world. Right, data and analytics. A lot of the previous assumptions, I'm not entirely sure are still accurate. The classic one to me is garbage in, garbage out, and I know that there were people who will say, and until their last breath, that garbage in, garbage out is a truism. And I think that I guess it always comes back to a spectrum. Right. If you're looking at just a data writ large, garbage in, garbage, yeah, that's true. But not all use cases, not all situations, not all data. This is my ranty, babbling way of saying, Michael, I think you may be true. You think you may be right, because a lot of the things that I think that we take for granted or we just take as a given, I think in the next year or so we're gonna learn are not given, and maybe some of these assumptions are not accurate assumptions. I do know that compute is not endless. I do know that storage is not endless. If you start talking about quantum computing, somebody asked me about that at a dinner party I was at Memorial Day, and like I went into one of my usual rants talking about quantum computing and like it's not zeros and ones, it's the possibility of zeros and ones and Schrodinger's cat and all this other stuff, and everybody around the dinner table is just like, this is dead silent. Like, who invited this guy?
Yeah. Can we talk about succession or something?
Yeah, exactly right. Can we talk about football now? Like, because the world is changing, man. The world is changing.
Absolutely.
Any other interesting, compelling questions? Oh, yeah. Machine drift. I need to look at that some more. Mentioned in. Yeah. Yeah. Michael, I'm loving some of the provocative questions here. Yes, thank you, Natalie. We're back to hockey in Canada. By the way, my beloved Edmonton Oilers were kicked out by Las Vegas. Las Vegas.
Right.
Hockey in Las Vegas. Yes. So my beloved Edmonton Oilers are, yeah. Every year, us Canadians are like, come on, Canadian team, come on, you can do it. To no avail. To no avail. Any other interesting stuff we need to talk about today, Ben? I think we were talking about next week. I'll be in San Diego.
Yes.
At the Data Governance Information Quality Conference that is hosted by our friends at the Dataversity. Tony Shaw and his team at Dataversity put on a fantastic event. So unlike where kind of Gartner's up here, Gartner is like VP, senior vice presidents, chief data officers, and maybe directors, senior directors, but generally, data, what we would call more data leaders. Now, CDIQ, CDO IQ, DG IQ, too many I's, Q's, acronyms, and not enough coffee for me.
That's what you're going to, it sounds like.
Yeah, the Dataversity events are fantastic for people who are managing data governance processes, who are managing data quality processes, who are doing this stuff day in and day out. So these events are fantastic. There's one happening next week in San Diego. It's an annual event. I will be speaking there at that event twice. One, I'm holding what's called a special interest group where we're going to talk about data sharing. It's some pretty cool stuff. I'll be talking about the future of MDM. Every time I say that, I want to say future. Yeah. Which begs the question of, what does the future of MDM look like, Malcolm? I'm so glad I asked myself. A lot to chew on, and I don't want to give away everything in my presentation, but I did talk about this at the IRM MDM and Data Governance Conference in London 2 weeks ago. And spoiler alert, the future of MDM is very similar to the rest of data management, which we've been talking about, which is a progression from human-driven to machine-driven and being on that spectrum. What are some of the interesting things that I see coming as a part of that? Well, there's some kind of the easy, kind of low-hanging fruit. Yes, of course, the use of generative AI and LLMs to support data validation, data enrichment, data quality use cases, that goes without saying. There's a few other really interesting things that I see unfolding. One is kind of the lines are increasingly blurring between what is master data and what isn't master data. And the reason those lines are blurring is because there are incredible insights that kind of sit adjacent to MDM that will significantly inform MDM. And what I'm talking about here is the use of knowledge graphs and AI to kind of pre-process data to help better inform master data decisions. Another interesting things that we're seeing is the use of these technologies, particularly in this case, graph, to augment traditional processes, including entity resolution. So there's, historically matching, entity resolution, aka matching, has largely been done for the same way for easily 20 years, believe it or not. These algorithms all kind of work the same way. They're looking for homophones and kind of phonetic symbols and sound X's and things that sound the same or look the same based on differences in characters, but they've all kind of worked the same way for 20 years. But the integration of graph into that process is going to be a game changer. I actually said that on a post on LinkedIn yesterday. It's a game changer because layering in knowledge graphs on top of entity resolution is going to allow us to significantly speed up batch processes because we'll focus where we need to focus instead of focusing everywhere. The problem with match is that we match everything. And we look at every potential pair of records in a record set. And if you're talking about billions of rows in a table, the compute for legacy match processes gets serious. It gets quick because every pair is evaluated against each other, right? You layer in a graph on top of that, you can understand where there are relationships and where there aren't. You can understand in another, using a match term, you can identify the singletons and just push the singletons aside, right? Because if they're not related to anything else in the data set, well, then they're singletons, right? And you don't need to apply compute power to analyze them. So graph matching is going to be huge. Another thing that I see happening here is that the way I describe it is matching will start to increasingly happen in what I would call in situ, meaning in place. So historically, MDM, you had to go to MDM, meaning the data had to go to a hub. You had to replicate data and put it into a hub, and you copy all this data and create these replicates and drop it into a hub. In the future, matching will happen where the data sits, in business applications, in tables and schemas, wherever the data sits, right? There will still be some centralized hub because that's where business rules will be managed, but the business rules and the governance policies that MDM enforces will be separated from that match process. Will create a lot of scale. So breaking those things will create a lot of scale. Another key word here, folks, for the future of MDM is all about adaptability. The future of MDM is adaptive. What do I mean by that? Breaking away from our good old friend, the single version of the truth, and having multiple versions of the truth based on context. We've known this for a long time, folks, that the way that marketing looks at the world is different from the way that finance looks at the world, and they could both be right. Meanwhile, if your CEO asks how many customers do we have, there can only be one answer. So a good way to think about this is that the notion of truth is contextually bound. Within every context, there can be only one version of truth, but there are multiple contexts in an organization. There's a marketing context, there's a finance context, there's a procurement context, there's even a CEO context. And within each of those contexts, there is only one version of the truth. But your MDM program will need to adapt to the fact that there are multiple contexts and multiple versions of the truth, and that will all exist simultaneously. So that also includes, by the way, multiple potential master data models for each of those contexts, and having a solution that can adapt to those models, where MDM adapts to the model instead of the business process having to adapt to a single monolithic one-size-fits-all data model. So much to chew on. Go ahead, Ben.
I would say that's one of the most difficult things you can do, right? Is having to re-engineer and rebuild every single business process you have at your company to fit the MDM, right?
Right. Well, right. But this is why for a lot of organizations, MDM is kind of a dirty four-letter word instead of a three-letter acronym, is because companies kind of did highly centralized, top-down, heavy-handed approaches to MDM that said you need to conform to this model or else.
Right.
And that's what drove a lot of companies to go and figure things out on their own, or a lot of departments. I would argue it's why CDPs, customer data platforms, even exist. Is because marketing organizations went to IT, said, hey, listen, we need a single version of the truth. We want a customer 360. And then IT said, well, yeah, you can do that as long as you conform to this one version of the truth. And marketing is like, nope, doesn't work for us. So they went and built their own thing. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar software segment. Yeah, customer data platforms that are basically light, LITE, versions of MDM.
Right.
So, yeah, the adaptability, both from a kind of an infrastructure perspective, but also a governance perspective. And that's frankly going to be the harder part. The technology here, having an adaptive technology that can allow multiple data models, multiple versions of the truth. Frankly, that's not the easy part. The hard part is the governance framework that needs to be put in place to support that, because now instead of one set of business rules, right? This is kind of the attractive thing about the centralized, heavy-handed, top-down approach. It's only one set of business rules you got to figure out. But if you've got this adaptive approach, there's going to be multiple sets of business rules. But this is where AI comes in, right? Because I think AI can really help augment and accelerate some of those business rules. Because again, if you have access to all of your metadata, every past transaction, every customer service call, every login event, everything, if you have access to that and AI is trained on that, AI can start to tell you what the best rules are for those contexts.
Yeah.
So it's pretty daunting to think that you could have a single governance organization now have, write 10 governance policies for 10 different versions of the truth. But AI is going to start helping with that.
Absolutely. Well, Malcolm, I am getting the scary countdown at the bottom of the window here. We are ending just over.
I see it too. I see it too.
But
We're down to 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah.
Just want to thank everybody who joined, participating. We had a lot of Q&A this time, a lot of fun going back and forth with everybody. We will make the recording available. Check out the Prophecy YouTube channel, and we will see you next month.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.